we cannot use the power of procurement, and we have no procurement automation. No, of course not. If you have so many companies in different areas with their own automation solutions, it's impossible to combine that. So you have to find other solutions. You have to resist these arguments and use them into arguments to innovate. And then we made a big mistake. It's difficult for a procurement officer to say, but this is the biggest mistake we made. What we said was, we want to reduce the prices for 10%. And we got a reaction out of the organization and from the suppliers. Well, they didn't tell us, but it was absolutely sure they thought they are crazy, because it was not possible. And if something is not possible, don't do it. But our CFO mentioned this figure, and we had to argue a lot to change that. And at that moment, when he said, we want to reduce the prices with 10%, that should lead to a cost reduction per year of 130 million euros. And I can tell you that's a lot of money in an installation branch, where we make a profit, say, 2%, and then we do a very good job. So 130 million a year cost reduction was impossible. We were able to change that in, are we willing to change? Are we willing to change our process, our mindset, our demands to our clients and to our suppliers? That's what we used. And if you look at the cost reduction, the total cost of ownership, of course, by combining all the volumes, by combining a lot of specifications, you have a very short-term euros because of more volume. You have extra discount. That's the most simple way of doing business in procurement. The other side is much more difficult. They are process related. We want to increase our efficiency, and we want to reduce on-process costs, because there is what we have to change, and reduction on risk. But the problem is with these things, they are so difficult to measure. How do you measure a reduction of risk? What did you save by reducing a risk in the contract? It's impossible to measure. And at the end, we still had the idea of the CFO saying, we want to have this 130 million euros. Perhaps you can imagine now why I left this company. Another challenge is the time spent of procurement. As I said in the sheet, that in the moment the engineer wants the influence of the procurement officer, procurement say, well, I have no time because there's a problem there and a problem in that project. What we found out is that if you look at the so-called SOL situation, that's the situation as it should be. A senior buyer has a strategic role, the buyer more or less tactical, and the orderer does the operational part. When we measured, we found out that the reality was something like this, that the senior buyer was doing a lot of technical work and even operational work. He was sitting behind the computer and making the orders. The buyer, even worse, and strange enough, the orderer, because they were doing that job, he had time to negotiate. And then you don't get the results what you want. We found out that, more or less calculating, that 25% of our time was spent to the wrong procurement work. And if you calculate that, then you find out that when you were able to reduce that, you could save 10 to 12.5 FTEs. And if you use that for your tactical and your strategical negotiations, it could lead and that's an estimate, 5%, then you had the first 65 million already. So this was an important figure for us to use. It meant that we needed an internationally standardization of our e-procurement. And this is special issue is non-operational. And I will explain that, why it's non-operational. If you put it into a scheme, you have a technical procurement by a buyer, there's a contract coming, it's contract management. You do a call-off based on these contracts, and you analyze what's happening, and that's an input for the technical procurement again. This call-off is specialized in red, as I mentioned before, because there were so many different departments, so many different offices, that it was impossible to make an ERP system for that. That was far too expensive, so we didn't. Therefore, we reduced it to these items. For technical procurement, you have e-sourcing, contract management, and product procurement information on the contract side. And for the analysis, you do dynamic and static information. The next step was e-sourcing we take out, because therefore you have internet. And internet is the best solution for sourcing, in our opinion. On the organization, that's more or less the same as what Vale told us. So I won't go too deep in detail. The biggest issue is that the procurement organization is able to contribute to the IMTech organization, to the strategic items. That was the most important thing in that moment. Some results. We had short-term cost reduction. No discussion about that. We were early involved in projects by selling our arguments to the internal client. We got a decision that we got a procurement portal. It was absolutely not done before, that procurement could get a portal. We had some identification about the tasks and the responsibilities, international contracts, product group management, all well-known things for you. But the most important thing is procurement is hot. And that was not done before. If you want to change your approach, you have to put effort in your HR. So we did a roadshow to all the divisions, HR managers, directors, and so on. And we want to close the gaps between what we want and what we had. And that was a tough thing, I must say. That was quite hard to confrontate people with a lack of knowledge. But if you train them, then it's possible to change that. We had a complete roadmap what to do to train our procurement people, but then also we got the crisis, and that was a pity. Then they reduced the possibilities for us. This sheet is almost equal to what in the presentation of Vale. The only difference is I've mentioned some difficult things, or different things, sorry. The influence on the financial result and the supply risk. We use this model in HR. What we said is this model should help us in how to manage the supplier and contract management, how we have to classify our product groups. And if you remember the presentation of Vale, you understand what I mean, that some product group is in that area, others is there, and so on. We also want to classify our suppliers, and that's the most important thing, we want to show our people how to approach in a certain market. And based on that, how do we find the right person on the right spot in the procurement process? If you combine all these things, then I don't have to explain that because I think you know the Kraljic model, but if not, it's not so important. You can imagine that if there is a low supply risk, so you can get it on every corner of the street, with a low financial risk, you don't have to put much effort in that. So that means that for that area, you need a procurement man who is thinking in logistics, how to do it efficient. That's the most important thing. And if you go to the other ones, then it's clear that if you have a low supply risk and a high financial risk, you need a shark. You need somebody who negotiates with suppliers on the basis of war. If one supplier doesn't manage the supplyment or the delivery, then you take another. In this area, procurement doesn't care about if a supplier dies, yes or no. If the supply risk is very high, but the influence on the cost is very low, you need a troubleshooter. You need somebody who tries everything to find the right product to get it. And if in the future, in the near future of Brazil, you will need a lot of this kind of people. If you put a shark in that area, I can assure you that nobody gets the material. And of course, in the right top corner, you need the relation manager. That's the area where you need partnerships. Difficult to get, high risk. You need a supplier which you can trust, and you need a procurement man who handles that, and that's a troubleshooter. I'm coming to the end. We have some lessons learned. What we did, and I advise you to think about it, is we trained our procurement management team. We trained them in selling. And it was fantastic to see how they changed their mind. In my opinion, every procurement officer should be a salesman too. We trained them in selling, that it was absolutely necessary to have procurement involved earlier in the process. We sold our knowledge. We sold the influence we had on the internal client and on the supplier side. We had a lot of knowledge. We have a lot of negotiation power. And we sold our idea to have an e-procurement system. Sorry. Yeah. That's perhaps a very good idea for you. When we did this training, at the end, we were so successful in selling that our management said, next year we make it the year of procurement. And it was fantastic to see what happened in the world around us, that procurement was so important for Imtech that they said 2006 is the year of procurement. Later on we were less happier because we got a lot of discussions to make, but at that moment it was very important for us to be taken seriously. So perhaps it's a good idea for you to sell procurement to the management and say, well, 2011 is the year of procurement for your company. But be aware that innovation possibilities are absolutely related to the type of industry where you are in. The way you do it is a human behavior. You can train yourself to make it possible. Know that there are different drivers for your internal client. The CFO was very interested in showing the world that he was able to reduce 10%, and we wanted to show a 10% cost reduction. That's a complete other driver. So perhaps it's wise to find out what are the drivers. What are the drivers for your internal client? Why is he talking like that? Why is your management still price-focused instead of cost-focused? You have to sell procurement as the best internal partner. Make it clear what you can do based on the driver. If your project manager is interested in the lowest cost, you have a partner in crime. You can have your management convinced about the necessity. Well, a lot of items are mentioned over there. Support your internal client. Be a part of his supply chain, not of your own, because he's interested in his supply chain. And as said before, project management is the most important one. And then you don't have to convince them that they have to make the change from price sinking to cost sinking. An important question is where in the supply chain you are. If you are at the end of the supply chain, you can have other decisions than when you are at the beginning. We had the idea that we could press our suppliers to certain conditions, saying, well, if you don't do it, we go to another. The problem was that specifically this supplier was a prescribed supplier for a project. So when the CFO told me, well, you have to kick them out because they don't do what we want, I told him, well, that's a good idea, we will do that, but you have to call the client because he's in our project prescribed by the client, so we have to stop that project. And he said, well, that's impossible. He said, well, that's true, but why are you asking such a stupid thing? Because that's happening. Drivers are the most dangerous thing if you don't understand them. Find out what the driver is of your competitor. The right employee on the right spot, it's clear. Make results measurable. If you want to show something, make it measurable in figures. If you can't do it, if you can't say, this is the result, stop it, because it doesn't work. Operate as a team. Think about the 11 kakas. Some lessons specific for the Brazil situation. Your government will ask everything to make this to a success. They won't accept that the Olympic Games will not be successful. They won't accept that the World Championships football as an organization, not as a team, it's a different thing, but it must be a success. So all the materials, all the personnel, all the people you have will be pressed, their drivers, to this project. And I don't know if you understand that 1 kilogram of steel can only be used once. And that's with all the other aspects is the same. So you will have a hell of a job to get materials, to get employees to do your projects instead of those. And you will be faced with the sustainability discussions. We had that in Europe, and sometimes it's ridiculous what they are asking, but they are there, and you have to accept that. Don't see it as only difficulties. There are all chances. If you have a good supplier, if you have a good supply chain with a lot of suppliers with knowledge, They have experience, they have the knowledge to help you to solve this problem. Because you cannot have every information by yourself. But if you use the knowledge of today, then you can handle that discussion. A small thing about risk management, as I said before. The best risk management is doing nothing at all. But I don't think you will accept that. The second best is making a contract in which everything what can happen is covered. But it will lead to a situation where work is not possible. And the third one is taking risk is a part of the job. So if you be aware of the risks, if you have your suppliers, if you have your clients talking with you about the risk, the possible risk, you can take action in reducing these risks. And agree that it is a part of the job that you have a risk in the project. Use this as a figure showing your internal client that procurement is more than only this sheet is showing. We have a lot of more possibilities. And this is probably, and you need an hour and a quarter to show it, but this is probably the most important sheet for you as procurement managers, procurement officers. The winner is the project manager of your company. And if you know a cycling race, then you know that a lot of work for the workers is done in the first 150 kilometers. And mostly there is no camera showing that work. But after 150 kilometers, the workers are going out, and the top man of the team is in the position to win the race. And that is what we as procurement managers has to accept. Our job is done far before the point where the success is made by the project manager. That's our position, but I can tell you that all the people who have done their work in the first 150K have a very good salary. So it's worth doing a job outside the cameras. On behalf of Navy and Perspective, I thank you very much for having me here. It's a long trip coming here. It's a long trip back. I know it. I don't even get time to get used to the time differences. But it was a pleasure being here. And I hope we have a small discussion to follow. Thank you very much.